Welcome to our last tutorial for this 4-part series, and I hope you made time to watch all the other 3 tutorials that we have for you in this series. This is part of the Sex Rights Africa's Making Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Real project. And in tutorial 4, I would like to share with you some of the challenges and what we can do about them, most importantly, because I did highlight in tutorial 3, I think at the end, that there are some challenges, of course, with some of the ways in which we work and some of the things that we're tackling. But of course, there's always something that we can do about these challenges. My name is Mzi Nduna, and when I'm not teaching students who are enrolled for courses in psychology, I work with community-based organizations, bridging the gap between science, theory, and practice. And so I've given this a title, Going Far with Legal, because community-based organizations always work with small budgets, but they do a lot with the small budgets that they have. 4 challenges that we are discussing in this tutorial. And remember, these are challenges that we learned from the Sex Rights Africa Making Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights a Reality in Southern Africa project. And the project is a project of the AIDS Foundation of South Africa. In tutorial 1, I gave you some background and details of where the project was implemented in KZN, Eastern Cape, and Mpumalanga. I gave you information of the organizations that AFSA partnered with in these areas. I also shared with you why we are mainly focused on work that happened in KZN and Mpumalanga and less so from the Eastern Cape. But remember, the series Sexual Realities, it looks like this. It is on the internet. It does have a case study from Flagstaff, so you can also learn about the findings from Flagstaff in that book. So 4 challenges were mentioned to us by our partners. A challenge with civil society funding models, a challenge with ability to cover a big space, so they were limited in what they could cover, a challenge in ensuring safety for all, and a challenge in sexual orientation and gender identity advocacy and intervention work. Let's talk about funding models. One of the things that civil society spoke about as a challenge for them was the short-term funding model. The projects tend to be funded for anything between 12 months and 24 months. And they found that makes it very difficult for them to plan and prepare. So if you are a donor and you are watching our tutorial, please think about that and think about what it means to have a longer term project and how much can be done if we blend our funding cycles so that our CBOs can have long-term projects. So in our post-intervention evaluation with the partners, the community members themselves, because we interviewed people in their organizations, but we also went and interviewed people in the community to find out what they had to say. And one of the things that we kept hearing a lot was it ended so quickly. We were still enjoying, we were learning a lot, we want them to come back. The project ended so quickly. Why? Because the funding was for a short term. So it's important that we think about continued and consistent presence in the communities, because this is necessary as our work is about changing attitudes. And even when they have changed and we can report in our post-evaluation report that there has been a shift in attitudes are amenable to being changed again. So it's very important that we keep on interacting with the communities and we don't stop the interventions, because once you stop the interventions, then the change might regress. Of course, because new people are getting born every day. So there are people who always need to hear this message. So if we have an intervention, then we stop and then we go. 5 years later, we go back there. Those who were 10 at the time when we were there, they are now 15 and they still need this information. They have not received it. So whilst I'm sending a message also to people who are donors, I'm also interested in finding ways in which CBOs themselves can resolve the issue about short-term funding. One of the things that we spoke about in our tutorial number 2 is the importance of collaborations and networks with other organizations. This is important not only so that you can share space and share platforms where you talk, but also so that you can share funding. And also, if your funding has, for example, finished, then maybe they still have a project running and maybe they still have funding and they can be able to continue with the education, with the sharing of information, and with the advocacy whilst you are still working on your own proposals and waiting for funding to come. So it's very important that in the same area or in the same site, there should be multiple organizations trying to do this work. The second thing that we learned from this project is what CPOs called challenges with the areas that we can cover. So they found that there was more demand for their work as organizations than what they could provide. So the areas are vast. In the villages are far from each other. It's very difficult to reach these villages within the short space of time that is allowed by the funding. So they would love to cover more. Yes, they are able to do that with things like community radio stations we heard. They are able to do that through social media. So they are able to do that through the media. But they also would love to go and hold the community dialogues in those communities, and they are not always able to do that because of the limitations of either the period that the project is funded or that the funding does not allow them to go far. So how do we get around that? Because remember, tutorial number 4 is about, yes, there is a challenge, but what can we do to get around this challenge? So as CBOs, it's important that we find ways to reach out and to make information and education available through less labor-intensive means. So, for example, Sex Rights Africa created an online platform. So you can use that online platform for your work. You know that you're not going to be there forever. You know your funding is going to end. You know you cannot reach everywhere. But we know also young people are on social media. We know that young people, one of the basic needs. I teach psychology, so one of the things that I want to add to Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs is data. Data has now become the basic need for young people, and they do spend their money on data. When they have that, they can access your information through the websites. So you can post your information on Sex Rights Africa. You can also tag Sex Rights Africa when you post on Facebook. You can post on Twitter. You can post on Instagram. Keep posting and keep posting and keep posting, so that when you cannot reach the place physically, then network coverage can reach that place for you. So we've dealt with challenge number 2. A video like this, for example, is one of the examples because it is freely available and anyone and everywhere can watch this video. The third thing was ensuring safety for all. There is a challenge. So inclusive interventions and interventions are aimed at integrating people, right? So we should all be there. It's inclusive. However, there is something that sexual and reproductive health organizations work on, for example, gender-based violence. So they all work on gender-based violence, and remember, we want to be inclusive in our work. We want to bring the community together, everybody. One of the challenges was, what happens then if you are delivering an intervention in a particular community and you have community dialogues, and as part of the community dialogues, you happen to have a person who is the alleged perpetrator in the same room as the person who is victims, who are victims, or he was a victim of the perpetrator. How do we ensure safety for all and still be inclusive in our projects? We know, we are from these communities, we know who are the perpetrators of gender-based violence. How do we sit with them in the same rooms and discuss contraceptives, because now the topic is different? We know who people who deny women their right to abortion. How do we then be inclusive and include them when they don't ensure that women are safe? Because when women are denied abortion at the clinic, they go and have an unsafe backstreet abortion. So how do we then sit with the people that we feel these are the people who wrong us? These are people who are the perpetrators. We know these people. So that is one of the dilemmas that CPOs are faced, that they would love to be inclusive, but they also struggle to work with people that they feel they either disagree with, or they feel that these are the perpetrators of human rights violations in their communities. And so it's difficult to sit with them. How do we get around this challenge? Because we would love to be inclusive. We would love to work with everyone in our interventions. As the UN would say, we should leave no one behind. So how do we leave no one behind when we have these issues with the people that we are meant to work with? One of the things that we learned from the CPOs is that it's very important as part of the work that we do around human rights to also teach about tolerance. Very important that we teach about the legal processes and what these legal processes entail. Because sometimes as the communities, we really get angry when we see an alleged perpetrator out on bail. And we believe that they should not be out, and rightfully so, because we believe that they are a danger to the society, that women and children are going to be at risk if this person is out on bail. But on the other side, there is a legal process that's running, and this person applied for bail because they are eligible for this, and the magistrate granted the bail because there were no reasons for the magistrate to not grant the bail. So how do we deal with these tensions? It's very important that we educate the communities about the legal processes. It's very important that we teach about restorative justice as well, because a person may serve their sentence. When they finish their sentence or when they are released on parole, they're going to come back to the community. How do we then deal with these people when they come back to the communities? It's very important that we teach about these things. But also it's very important for perpetrators to be sensitized about the impact of their presence in inclusive spaces. Whilst we want to make their spaces inclusive, we also want to make sure that the spaces are safe. So it's very important that as CPOs, we manage the spaces that we work with to make it emotionally safe for volunteers, emotionally safe for staff, emotionally safe for our beneficiaries, who are our communities as well. The third and the last challenge that was shared by participants who work for the organizations, but also by the communities when we interviewed people from the communities, is what is called, there's a book entitled Pathways to Parenthood. And in that book, I found this concept, the heteronormative matrix. Maybe it exists in other books that were written before that, but I read about it a lot from that book. So that the heteronormative matrix is the assumption that if you are born a female, you will be a woman and you will be attracted to a man and you will get married to the man. And that is not always the case. So the dating, marry, childbirth, happy ever after is not always the case for everyone. And guess what? I addressed this in this book. So in this book, which was published as part of this project with funding support from the Center for the Study of Sexualities, AIDS and Gender, I address this assumption of a heteronormative matrix and how that affects young women and girls' sexual vulnerability. So the title of the book is A Magnifying Glass and a Fine-Tooth Comb, Understanding Girls and Young Women's Sexual Vulnerability. And the book is freely available. You can download it online from the University of Pretoria's website using this title. So in this book, I talk more about this challenge that was shared to us by our implementing partners, which is the challenge around cis-heteronormativity. But beyond what I discuss in the book, which is related to what we call the sequencing of our lives as adolescent girls and young women, the challenge with this matrix also exists in as far as sexual and gender identity diversity is concerned. Because sometimes parents or siblings or the society or even teachers, everybody minds everybody's business in our communities. So people who mind your business might feel disappointed at you because you are a lesbian. They might be questioning why you chose to be a lesbian. They might be confused about your life as a lesbian. They might, be angry at you. They might revolt at you. And that is why we see hate crimes in our communities. And this is one of the problems that was a challenge for our communities, is to deal with parents who take their children to Sangoma because they think that their children needs an intervention, who take their children to church because they think their children need to be prayed for, who take their children to some kind of corrective therapy, whether it is through a psychologist or through a Sangoma or through a pastor, because we live in a society that is not accepting. So in South Africa, the constitution is clear. The CPOs are aware of the constitution. They follow the constitution, but the social norms may not be on par with the constitution. That is why we need to deal with this challenge. So how are we going to deal with this challenge? We had discussions with the CPOs, and they mentioned a few things in terms of what we can do and also what you can do to deal with this challenge. This challenge needs to be tackled collectively. That is what they were clear about. It is not one individual person or one organization which is going to help us deal with this challenge. It is a collective responsibility. We need to engage in public platforms in our local communities, and pledge support for LGBTI communities, because if we don't do that, then we make them invisible. It's very important that we talk about it out, and we also pledge support for organizations that work in this area, because if we don't do that, then we allow the community to marginalize and other those organizations. So we should not have a split in sexual reproductive health where we think that there are good organizations that work on family planning and GBV, and then there are others that work on LGBTI, because that exists in the civil society space as well. So it's very important that as civil society, we become inclusive ourselves before we expect our communities to be inclusive. It's very important that we educate and educate and educate, but most importantly, the CBOs also shared that it's important that we disincentivize people and institutions that reject LGBTI people. So by disincentivizing, what do we mean? We mean funders need to call the grantees out. If you're giving funding to an organization and the organization is unclear or it's not demonstrating its commitment to the LGBTI community, then don't give, because otherwise you are incentivizing an attitude, you are incentivizing prejudice. So it's very important that we withdraw our support from people, from leaders, from institutions, and from organizations that display homophobia or that do not publicly provide platforms that are clear about their support for the LGBTI community. So these are the challenges that we wanted to discuss. Also, it's very important that we encourage disclosure and we create safe environments for disclosure, because some of the work of the CPOs is related to exactly that, to disclosures. But when we encourage people to disclose, that is what the CPOs told us in their research, is that they then disclose and then people are at risk. So how then do they encourage people to openly live with their identities and then they are put at risk? So it's important that we recognize which areas are high conflict or high violent communities, because in high violent communities, then hate becomes a crime very quickly compared to communities that are generally not so violent. So it's very important that we unpack this and we don't discuss these acts of violence as if they were general acts of violence. So those are the challenges and those are the possible solutions to the challenges. And of course, these are not all the solutions that we can think of. You can also think of other solutions, and these are not all the challenges. But in a tutorial, we need to stick to 20 minutes so that you don't get bored with long tutorials. If you want to engage on these topics, on all 4 topics that we spoke about in this series of 4 tutorials, please drop us your comments. Please give us feedback. Please ask questions. We really look forward to your feedback on this. And please go to the website, AIDS Foundation of South Africa. There is a series of reports there that you can read. And this is what they look like on the cover. And they are from all these different sites that we worked in, but also you can download the book. There's additional material also on the website on the project. Thank you very much for watching all 4 of the tutorials, because I know you did. Thank you.